Hello, my name is Amanda Claire Vesti. I'm part of the Last Wishes Live Your Legacy team and the founder of Ancient and Sacred Trees. Today I'm going to share with you an ancient story over 2,500 years old. It's the source of the popular aphorism, the living are few, but the dead are many. What are the lessons contained within this ancient story? How might we find a way to reconcile life and death? We'll discuss this after we've gone through the story. Kisa came from a poor family of Savatthi, an ancient city in India. She was called Kisa, meaning frail or thin, lean and emaciated. Her thinness was probably due to the poverty in which she grew up. Gautami was her family name. Tradition tells us she was thin and rather unattractive. Though she was plain, her heart was rich and full of kindness and compassion. Because of her poverty and lack of beauty, she had a hard time finding a husband. But she hoped a man would someday see her inner beauty and marry her. Finally, it happened. A man did come along who saw her true beauty and married her and brought her into his parents' home. His parents, however, and the other members of his family disliked her because of her poverty and her plainness. They did not treat her well. They treated her like a skivvy, like a servant. They gave her all the very worst of jobs to do. But being a dutiful wife and loving her husband, Kisa undertook them all without complaint. So her husband was caught in an unhappy place between his love for his new wife and his love for his family. His family's poor treatment of Kisa caused him great pain, but things changed, as they often do, when she became pregnant. The family looked on her more kindly after that, and they changed even more when she gave birth to a longed-for son. The whole family accepted her now because she was the mother of the heir to the family name, and now she was finally truly happy. Her husband loved her and his parents, and family now honoured her. She was content. Then, one day, the unthinkable happened. Her infant son, joy of her heart, became ill and died. This was more than she could bear. Her darling, her treasure, the light of her life, her baby, lay limp in her arms. Besides being broken-hearted over the death of her son, her only child, she became desperately worried her husband's family would again despise her. She worried people would think her karma was the cause of her son's death. She worried that people would think she had done some great evil to have lost her son. She was even afraid her beloved husband would leave her to find a new wife from a better background. All of these worries and fears churned around and around and around inside her. She refused to accept what had happened. She convinced herself that her little son was only ill and not dead. She convinced herself all she needed to do was find the proper medicine and her baby would get better. Carrying her dead son, she went from house to house, asking for medicine for her sick child. People opened their doors to find a mother with a dead baby in her arms standing in front of them. Weeping, she said, "My son is ill, please can you help?" But the people only replied, "Where have you ever seen medicine for the dead? You had better take your child to the forest." Still she went from house to house as the sun travelled from one side of the sky to the other. Finally, in her desperate search for a medicine to make her baby well, she met a sympathetic and wise man, a kind man who realised Kisa was so distraught that she had lost her reason through grief. He advised her to visit the Buddha. "I think he can help," the man told her. Off she rushed to the monastery with her dead child in her arms, to where the Buddha was staying. "Please, please, please, can you give me medicine for my son?" she begged him. He looked at her carefully, then said he knew of a medicine that would help her, but she would have to get it herself. Eagerly and happily she agreed, so distraught she would have agreed to anything at that point. "What is the medicine? Where can I find it?" she asked him. "Mustard seed. Bring me mustard seed and I will help you." But as she turned to go, the Buddha stopped her and said, "You only need get a very small amount of seed, but the seed must come from a house where no one has ever died." Remember, this was in India 2,500 years ago. She had to find a house where no one had ever died. At the first house, she shared her need for mustard seed and was told she could have it. But when she said the seed had to come from a house where no one had died, the woman at the door told Kisa her husband's father had died just last week. "Then I cannot use this seed," Kisa said. So she went to the next house, but the boy told her his grandfather had died. "Then this seed is of no use," Kisa said. In the next house, a grey-haired woman said her grandchild had died of an illness just last year. In the next house it was a cousin, in the next a mother, the next a brother, the next a sister. And so went Kisa in the blistering heat of the day, carrying her dead child on to the next house, and the next, and the next, and the next. Finally, as the light began to fade from the sky, it dawned on her that there is no house free from mortality. Finally, as the sun slipped away and the stars began to reveal themselves shimmering against the great sky, she realized what the Buddha was teaching her. Finally, she took her baby into the forest. At last, she understood what the Buddha had wanted her to find out for herself, that suffering is a part of life and death comes to us all. Once Kisa Gotami accepted the fact that death is inevitable, she could reconcile herself to the truth. Having come to the understanding that death is the destiny of all people, all beings, she returned to the Buddha, became a nun, awakened and entered the first stage of enlightenment. This story about Kisa the mustard seed in the forest reminds us of impermanence of the reality of death, and it does it well. So what other lessons and insights can we glean from this ancient story? Let's look at a few. Imagine in the heat of the day, the decomposition. Imagine the shock of opening the door and the heat, to be confronted by a decomposing body held in a weeping woman's arms. This story then helps us to understand how strong emotion can be at times and how it can help us deny a truth we don't want to face. The story also helps us to see how it can even cause us to act in ways outside of normal social convention, in ways we wouldn't normally act. If we recall in the story the man who sent Kisa to see the Buddha, he did so because he realised she'd become mentally unbalanced because of grief. He was able to rise above his own shock, his own reactions, to see the need of another. He is the guide who points her in the right direction for healing and transition to a new stage in her life. The story tells us that asking for help from others in time of need is important. This is when it is so helpful to have others around us to support and point us in the right direction. Most of us can probably think of a time where life events have left us unbalanced and in shock in some way. So this then is a lesson that Kisa is teaching us, to be aware, to be mindful, to help us maintain or gain balance. And in a resilience, we can practice meditation to help us gain greater awareness and to be more mindful. Sorrow, sadness, happiness and love are always going to be a part of our lives. We need to remember this. We can practice mindfulness, so hopefully we don't become overcome to the point of complete breakdown. The story shows Kisa's journey of suffering from unhappiness to happiness to deep sorrow. To help us navigate our way through life and experience, mindfulness and time in nature can really help us gain inner strength to navigate the transitory nature of life as it is. Her great grief had overwhelmed her, and the Buddha carefully and slowly helped her remember and regain her equanimity. So if we look at compassion, what mustard seeds can we give to someone so they can go to the forest and then return? For it is in attempting to collect the mustard seeds that leads her to go to the forest. In other words, she steps into absolute reality, and in doing so, in being immersed in nature, in connecting with nature, the world, the true reality of things, that life and death are a part of the natural way of things, and that we are a part of nature too. Another part of this is being given a task to do. In the greatest ancient tales, the hero always has at least one task to complete. Sometimes it is better to be engaged in practical activity as a way of helping to cope with shock. Left to our own devices, we can go around and around and around without moving on, in much the same way as Kisa did, walking around and around the village with her dead son. It is a way for the psyche to journey through its inner landscape. We are all born, and we must all die. It is impossible to continue in a state of denial when faced with the true nature of things. In becoming fully present in nature, we can begin the process of healing, of reconciliation, because the reality of life and death are everywhere. Stepping outside of or away from nature causes suffering, and we become locked inside ourselves. We have to remember what Kisa discovered. No house, no person is without sadness or love, without comings and goings, without life or death. If we can remember this, if we can live with a better perspective on things, with greater balance, and peace will be ours. Here is the value of community, of having people to help you in your time of need, also of having someone who can lead you to a new integrative experience. Those who can be present for you so that you can learn how to verbalise what you are going through, what you are experiencing, so you can reconcile it and bring home the lesson to yourself and to humanity. We see this when Kisa accepts the death of her child finally, and later when she becomes a nun. This is not a discussion about following any particular religious or spiritual tradition, but an exercise in exploring what ancient culture, ancient stories have passed down from our ancestors, those who have passed on, what they can teach us. The villagers tell Kisa to go to the forest. The forest is a return to reality. It is engagement with the physical realm, with nature as it is, acknowledging death, accepting it and returning from it, leaving the liminal behind to return to the living, to the village. One of the folk etymological definitions of the word nirvana, or enlightenment, uses the root varna to refer to forest or woods. Based on this root, varna has been metaphorically explained in Buddhist tradition as referring to the forest of defilements, also called the five aggregates, what we might call the roots of suffering. Nirvana in this sense, then, means to be free from that forest of defilements or suffering. We also see in this story how the forest, how nature is a source of healing through reconciliation, and how it is also used as a metaphor to help understanding. This, then, is a glimpse of the value of the ancient stories that we are handed down to us by our forebears. A literary tradition has evolved around this 2,500-year-old story, much of it in oral form and in local plays in much of Asia. In the verses of the ancient elder nuns in Pali Canon recount a version of this tale. A number of popular similar alternative versions also exist. If you've been moved by what you've heard, you could spend time investigating this story and the culture that surrounds it further. It's an ancient story and it still has resonance today. It is, as the best stories are, timeless in its wisdom. The story of Kisa is recited by Nick Cave in the song Hollywood by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds from their 17th studio album Ghostine. His album is a commentary on the death of his own son. It's a beautiful song, and I recommend you go and listen to it. I finally leave you with 2 verses said to be from Kisa herself. I've gotten past the killing of sons, have made that the end to men. I don't grieve, I don't weep, it's everywhere destroyed. Delight. The mass of darkness is shattered, having defeated the army of death, free of fermentations I dwell. And finally, this lovely verse weaves in the beauty of the forest and the natural world of which we are all a part. As bird that leaves behind a copse might then in fruit-filled forest live, so have I left those of wisdom lean, a swan to a great lake arrived. Thank you for listening, and if you'd like to know more about eco-friendly burials and everything to do with end of life and how to organise your last wishes for yourself and your loved ones, please visit our website at www.lastwishes.world.